Hey, this is Troy Taylor with the Championship Football Coaches Clinic podcast, sponsored by Reps, Virtual Reality, First Down Playbook, Rack Coach, Tip of the Spear, Top Hopper, and Sports Workbook. Today we have Coach Fred Goldsmith, the former head coach at Duke and Rice. Coach, how are you doing today? Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself for the coaches that don't know that's watching the podcast today?
Well, thanks, Troy. Oh, I'm doing well. It's been a few years since I've done some ball coaching, but I was fortunate enough to come up under some, really good people. As a high school assistant coach under a legend named Nick Cody's, who's in the Pennsylvania and Florida Hall of Fame, and a guy named Jim Knoblack, who was a great coach at Gainesville, Florida High School. Later, coached the line at Florida, Kentucky, and the Buffalo Bills. And then as an assistant coach in college, I was a graduate assistant under Doug Dickey, who was a great coach at Tennessee and Florida, later the AD at Tennessee, and learned a lot there. And also worked under, after that, Rudy Hubbard, who's in the College Football Hall of Fame as Coach Dickey. And Rudy had come from Ohio State and hired me to be defensive coordinator. His first right off the bat there at Florida A&M, and stayed there 5 years. And the last 2 years, we were the Black National Champions in 1977 and the first Division I AA National Champions in 1978, and won our conference. Well, most of the time we were there. And, that was a different time in HBCU's history, because we were loaded with guys that went to the National Football League then, as well as Grambling was, and Southern University and Tennessee State, Jackson State. Each of us probably had a dozen or more players in the National Football League at that time, and were very prominent with the Steelers and the Raiders and the Vikings teams that were going to the Super Bowl all the time. So it was a great learning experience under Rudy, and I was so happy to see Rudy get into the National Football Foundation Hall of Fame 2 years ago. And then I went to work for Ken Hatfield at the Air Force Academy, another great coach, and had a chance to work with him with his first head coaching job. And that Air Force program wasn't easy to turn around now. Just 6 years after the Vietnam War ended, it was hard to get kids to come to the academies. But Ken's the one that installed the wishbone at the Air Force, and he told us, Chan Gailey came to work there at the same time I did, who later was head coach of the Cowboys and Georgia Tech and Buffalo. And he called us up to his house one afternoon after our first season, and that at the end of that spring. And he said, we either got to do something different or better than everybody else. And it sure doesn't look like we're going to do it better. Because we just didn't have the talent in the academy, so we're going to do something different. We're going to do the wishbone, and that's what Florida had run the last few years. Ken was an assistant coach there, and he was coaching the running back, so he knew that triple option. And we did that, and the rest is history. We beat Notre Dame 2 years in a row. We left to go to Arkansas, and Fisher DeBerry carried it on for the next 2 years. Defeated Notre Dame 4 years in a row, won a bunch of bowl games, big wins in bowl games. And so it was a great learning experience. And it was great for a defensive coach for me, because when you start running that triple option, we used to tell them, hey, give us 48 points or 40 minutes or 48 points. And we just, we stayed off the field. And when I coached for Rudy Hubbard, we ran it and had a great running game. And so, again, you don't have great defense statistics if you're standing there watching the offensive line blocking everybody, or, all the good things you do with the triple option. For both those offenses, we did it out of the eye, Florida A&M, and out of the wishbone with Ken. And so that was my experience under some great head coaches. And one thing I'd like to mention with those fellas, starting with Doug Dickey and Ken after him and Rudy, the hours that they gave us, we worked hard. Now, we worked hard, but they made time for our families. I can truthfully say that you had a good family life working for those three fellas. And, and they brought the Lord into it too. And Ken, I remember, went there to Air Force. It was all a bunch of guys that hadn't been together pretty much. And he said, no, we're going to do things the right way. And he told us that there, told us that at Arkansas. And Coach Dickey and he did both. So it was very, very important that we had good family life. We had a life and a staff that we did things revolving around the Lord and did it right. And then I remember Jerry Moore joining our staff at Arkansas at the end when we were there. And then I went to be head coach at Rice, and Jerry went to Appalachian, and gosh, he's in the Football Hall of Fame, with those 3 straight national championships. So it was a great time. Coaches that have remained very, very close, over these last 40 to 50 years. And so it was a wonderful time. So we had that family atmosphere. So, and we were fortunate to put together some good staffs at Rice and Duke for a while and just had a good time and finished up at Franklin High School in Franklin, North Carolina, and Lenore Ryan University there, and things went real well at both those places. So it's been a wonderful life.
Yes, sir. Really has. Yes, sir. My friend here, Johnny Herron, who played football at VMI, said, did Cal McCombs coach under you at Air Force? He was the DC in the 90s, then came to VMI where I played for him.
I've known Cal since we ran into each other and battled in Stark, Florida one day in 1974 after a kid, Sheldon Hodge, and is a coach of Mississippi now. But we were fighting for him. Cal was at the Citadel, and I was at FAMU. And so I've known him since then. But no, he came in with a group of guys that came with Fisher DeBerry right after, as soon as we left the Air Force. But I stayed good friends with Cal and spent time. I was doing broadcasting after I left Duke. I was doing broadcasting Western Carolina University's football games when Cal was head coach at VMI. And so we interacted there at that time. And Scott Wackenheim, who just resigned this year after a great career at VMI, was an offensive tackle for us the whole time that we were at the Air Force Academy.
And I've had Coach Wackenheim on the show twice, Coach, and we had Bob Trott. Anybody who has not listened to the Bob Trott podcast, you need to listen to that, because Coach Trott's one of the best defensive coaches I've ever been around. Coach, talk a little bit about Bob Trott and how you met him and the relationship y'all have had, Coach.
Well, Bobby is the smartest coach I've ever been around. He's very, very smart. He had an academic scholarship at the beginning at the University of North Carolina. And then when he, got to play right there, I think his sophomore year, he was the safety. And anyway, he told Bill Dooley, the head coach then, he wanted a football scholarship. So he wound up on the football scholarship. But he's extremely smart, a great friend, great family. Our families have intertwined, a bunch over the years. And my daughter and Bobby and Barbara are still real good friends, and they live about 50 miles apart. But very, very good coach and very loyal, wonderful person. And so I was happy to be able to spend 13 years with Bobby between our time at Air Force, Arkansas, and at Duke.
So who else are some of your assistant coaches that worked under you, Coach, that kind of flourished, on their own? Were there anybody else?
Yeah. My defensive coordinator for 6 years, Craig Bowl, he left me after we were at Duke, and we had a great year there. And he was with me the whole time at at Rice University, and I met him in Houston when he went to work for Tulsa. I was recruiting for Arkansas down there, and he was a rookie from up north, and so I've been recruiting for a number of years there. So I got to know him. We drove around and watched kids together, and then he went on to the University of Wisconsin. But Craig Bowl coached for him for 6 years, left to go to Nebraska. And he was out at Nebraska for a few years, and then he was offered the head job and the responsibility of taking North Dakota State from Division II to the next level. Well, you've seen what he did. He won a bunch of national championships. I think he won 3 in a row. Then he went to Wyoming, and he might have won more than that. But went to Wyoming, then one of his assistants took over, and it all looked familiar to me because they basically we're running the same defense, a lot of stuff we had done that we put in at Rice and Duke. But Craig had done a tremendous job. And then he wound up last year as president of the American Football Coaches Association. So he was wonderful. And then, a lot of good people. But I had Mike Heimerdinger was my offensive coordinator. That I worked with him for a year at the Air Force in one spring. And but then Dinger had gone on to Florida, and when I was looking, things hadn't worked out for anybody at Florida. This was before Spurrier took over. But Dinger was out at Cal State Fullerton, and when I got the job at Rice, I called him, and he became our offensive coordinator and did a tremendous job. Had 2 or 3 Super Bowl rings with the Broncos. He was with me for 6 years also. But let me tell you, the greatest coaching job I've ever seen on offense, Dinger, there was this young man named Bert Emanuel who was at UCLA, had been from Houston, went out there, and they had a couple of 2 top quarterbacks in the country committed to them the same day. They didn't know the other one was committed, one from Dallas and one from Houston. Bert Emanuel was one of those. Mm-hmm. He went out there, but now Bert had a beautiful girlfriend back in Houston. And he got homesick in a hurry. Well, after his second year there, he called me and wanted to transfer back. And we had another quarterback that was doing pretty well for us. But we were getting Bert ready to play too. He had to sit out a year. But Bert, now he could fly. I mean, he could truly fly like Bo Jackson. I mean, Bert, wow. He ran 4.28 on pro day. So anyway, our other quarterback got hurt in the second ball game of the season. And I had told Dinger, I said, you better get some stuff ready for that Bert can do. And he said, well, he can't do this, can't do that. I said, you better come up with something he can do because he's going to be the quarterback. And he came up with stuff, and it was tremendous. We got in the shotgun. We started running the option out of it. We ran what we call an upside. We got a lot of counter stuff because we had an All-American who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame, Trevor Cobb, who went in 2018. Mm-hmm. And so we would run a lot of the zone stuff and things like that. We got the offense from Dennis Erickson. We were the first ones in our part of the country to run it. Because Dennis was doing it at Washington State before he went to Miami and beating all sorts of teams he shouldn't have, And so Dinger took that stuff. We were running upside down options, shoveling the ball. I was fake it to Trevor one way, the zone. Dinger would come out the other way, shovel it to Jimmy Lee or a wing back underneath. So we'd run that, all sorts of short play action passing game and everything. And Bert really couldn't throw the ball down the field. But he was 4th in the country 2 years in a row in passing. And just could fly, and all of a sudden we turned a program that hadn't had a winning season in over 30 years. We turned that thing around back-to-back winning seasons with Bert, and then Bert went on to play wide receiver in the NFL. You might have heard of the Bert Emanuel rule about possession of the ball when you hit the ground and all this kind of stuff. But he caught 96 passes one year for Atlanta. And so Dinger came up with all that. Well, then Bill Lewis at East Carolina gives me a call, and they had a quarterback named Blake who later played for Cincinnati.
Yeah, Jeff Blake.
Yeah, and he did great. He flew Dinger in there to show him all that stuff. And then Bobby Bowden had heard about it. And so he flew Dinger in there to Tallahassee, and their quarterback, Charlie Ward, wound up winning the Heisman Trophy and them being national champions the next year, doing all this stuff. So, but that Dinger's the one that got that started.
Wow.
and of course now everybody in college football is doing all that. But Mike Heimerdinger, whose college roommate was Mike Shanahan, that's how I lost Dinger, is when Shanahan got the head coaching job with the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kyle, his son, came and played for us at Duke later on, my last year or two. And then he transferred. When I left, he transferred to Texas and caught a big pass to help them win. John McAvoy win the Big 12 one year. And, of course, he's done pretty darn good in the National Football League.
Both.
He is a wizard offensive coordinator.
Wow, Coach.
And the head coach now, but he runs that offense for them. And all, but Dinger had a lot to do with that. And John Zernhelt was a great line coach and later coached in the pros, but he was with me. He was wonderful. And Les Koenig. I had lots and lots of good coaches. Keith Burns went on to be a head coach at Tulsa and play in the NFL. Les Koenig was a really good coach. I had him at Rice and Duke at different times. And, he's been a coordinator at Alabama and TCU before that, and when they were really good. And so I was really, really blessed with some good people. And I hate to be leaving anybody.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to read my book, Comeback Coach, they can find it on Amazon or whatever. But, I tried to mention every single one. Clay Helton, who did a great job at Southern Cal, I didn't like what happened to him. But anyway, I coached his daddy in high school at Gainesville, Florida, when I was a young assistant. And he was with me as a GA and full-time coach at Duke. And then his daddy hired him away. And he's had a great career, doing a wonderful job at Georgia Southern. So, I just had so many good people.
You've coached at, you've been the head coach at Rice, you've been the head coach at Duke. Those are some very high academic. I mean, you were assistant at Air Force. I mean, those are some very high academic schools. So what did you do, Coach? I mean, is there a secret to it? I mean, does it take a certain type of coach to coach at those places?
You've got to do something different. I mentioned before, we did something different, the triple option there at Air Force. And then, like I said, when we went to Rice, we had to decide what we were going to do. And triple option is not something the fans love a whole lot. And so we had to find a different way to do that at Rice University. And because, like any school that's in the city, you have a hard time drawing. And Rice really was having a hard time drawing. And so, like I said, they've lost 30-something straight games and everything. But they lost about 18 or 19 straight at the time, but 30-something years. And so Dan and I, we sat down and said, well, who's pressing you? I said, well, look, we played UCLA. My last game at Arkansas, we played UCLA in the Cotton Bowl. We'd won the Southwest Conference. And Troy Aikman's last game. But they lost the game, too. They lost one game that year. Washington State just laid it on them. And, Washington State didn't have their kind of people, but they were doing something different. They were running a one-back offense, dropping back, but they had two running backs that gained over 1,000 yards. And they went and beat a very good Illinois team at Illinois by about 40 points. They went to Tennessee and beat a good Tennessee team by about 40 points. And so I said, there's something special with this thing. Because back in those days, if somebody lined up with one back, everybody just took for granted they were going to drop back and throw the ball. One back, no backs, things like that. But Dennis Erickson had put together this fantastic offense, and it was running the zone to the right, zone to the left, inside zone, outside zone. Now, we wound up with a tailback, Trevor Cobb, that had such good peripheral vision. He was like 5'9", about 180 pounds, running 4.5. But he could see and cut on a dime. And we could call the same play with Trevor after the first year. And we could pretty much just call one play and he'd turn into one or the other. But we had both those plays, draw play and a trap in there and a counter. The counter was real big. That where you pull the backside guard and the tackle, unless you had people then started using H-back. When we got to Duke, we used a big H-back in the backside guard to do the pulling. but a lot of bootleg stuff off of it. The boots, the counters, and some other play action passes. That was it. We had about 4 or 5 runs, but we brought Bob Bekowski.
Yes,
was the offensive coordinator at Washington State for Dennis.
Yes, and at Miami.
Yes, and so we brought him, and he spent about 5 days with us. Brought all sorts of film. Just right off the bat there at Rice. As soon as we got done with recruiting, we got him in there, and we put that offense in, and we had a quarterback named Donald Hollis the first couple of years. And Donald was a heck of a football player. He had been playing safety. I'd seen him in high school when I'd come there from Arkansas. Tried to get him, couldn't get him. But I'd seen him play quarterback. And he was just a big, tough kid that could run and he could throw and he was smart. And so I told him the first day, you're going to be the quarterback. Moved him back from safety. You're going to be the quarterback. He could execute all that. And he played the NFL. He started some games with Cincinnati. He started with Oakland. He and Gruden had a falling out on the sidelines. It was pretty visible on national television. Some people might remember that. And anyway, but Donald was a good player, so we did that, and we recruited Trevor Cobb. Craig Bowl and I, the first day we were there, went to see Trevor, and nobody really, I think there was 1 or 2 schools that wanted him, and we'd seen him at Arkansas, and we'd seen him fumble, and our coach recruiting there at the time said, well, I don't want any fumbles. Well, Trevor went on, and he carried the ball more than anybody in the history of the Southwest Conference, 2nd leading rusher in the history of the conference, 10th leading rusher in the history of the NCAA in his career, and he fumbled the ball once. Twice. He fumbled it on the opening kickoff, the first time he ever touched it his freshman year against SMU. And then he fumbled one time against Southwest Louisiana. That's the only time he ever fumbled in his whole career. And it was in the first 3 weeks of the season of his freshman year.
Yeah.
But we put all that together. Dinger put all that together. And so we were doing something different. And then TCU came along, Jim Wacker, when he was there, copied it the next year. He had a lot of success with it. And then he left and went to Minnesota. But we did that there. And then nobody east of the Mississippi was doing it. So 5 years later, when we went to Duke, we did it. And Eckhart, tailback, who was completely opposite side of tailback. Robert Baldwin was a big, strong kid from DeLand, Florida, which I had coached high school ball there at one time. And my brother was coaching there when Robert played. But he was getting ready to be a senior and being a captain as a junior at Duke. He'd only gained 300 yards. And he had a terrible spring. He wasn't in shape. And he called me one night. He said, Coach, don't count me out. I will be ready. I'll be in shape like you won't believe when school starts or when we come back. And he came back in great shape, great leader, gained 1,200-something yards, player of the year in the ACC that year. And we went on and had a great season. But that offense was new to the ACC and to that part of the country. And our defense we had been pretty conservative, 3-4 defense, basically 5 defensive backs or outside linebacker was like another strong safety. And we've done a good job with it for considering who we were playing with Texas and Texas A&M and Arkansas and Rice and Baylor. There's some great teams. But we had some more talent there at Duke. There were some guys that had been injured the year before. One sat out the year before, and we got them all back together. We had no injuries, and then Craig Bowl really started putting a lot of pressure on people too. And it was a good package, and Craig did a great job with it. And so we had good success there. But the success came from what Coach Hatfield originally told me, either do it better or do it something different. So we wound up doing something different, did it pretty good.
So when y'all went to the Air Force, was that the first time that these military schools had gone to the triple option? Or was people already doing it? So y'all did it first.
No. See, we went there in 1979. So in the late 60s, with the Houston Veer. Well, Houston Veer came out in the mid-'60s, and then Texas started running the wishbone.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was all in the late 60s. And then throughout the early parts of the mid-'70s, you had Alabama put it in 71. They surprised everybody in the opening game. Nobody knew they were going to do it because they've been mediocre for about 4 or 5 years in a row. And Coach Bryant was a good friend with Darrell Royal, the coach at Texas. And he went out there. Nobody knew he'd been there. Put his staff, put that thing in, I think after spring practice or something like that. And I know I was at Florida that year, and they beat the dickens out of us and everybody else. Had a running back named Johnny Musso, whose son later was real good on those good Northwestern teams in the 90s. But so they were doing it. Then Auburn was doing it, and Oklahoma was doing it. Oklahoma started right after Texas, and they were loaded with good players and speed, and so it was really, really big then, but it was starting to fade out. And so we put it in. We didn't do it in '79. The first year we started in 1980, and we weren't very good. It was something that Ken decided to do, but we didn't really have a quarterback in place. In fact, we had a tight end who had been a quarterback in high school, Scott Schaefer, that was our first triple option quarterback at Air Force. But then we got a boy named Marty Loudon, who was in the prep school, a basketball player who'd been a quarterback, in Eugene, Oregon, and put him in as a freshman the next year after he finished prep school. And it started to gel a little bit at a time. We didn't win many games. We played a good Illinois team there, and they scored 10 points in the first minute of the game. I told Jan Gilly on the headset, I said, we'll keep up like this. I think it's going to be 100. And then all of a sudden we settled down, and then right there in the middle of the second quarter, right maybe at the end of the first, boy named Ted Lundquist from Sunquist, Teddy Sunquist, who later was the GM of the Broncos when he got out of the Air Force. He broke through for 80 yards. I mean, nobody even saw him. He just popped that thing to fullback, went 80. We hung in that game. Now, Jeff George was the quarterback, really good. They just beat Michigan State the week before, Missouri. And so that game, we thought we had won it. We stopped them on 4th down and thought the game was over. About a minute to go around midfield. And then one of the officials comes running over from the other side and said, well, wait a minute. There was an inadvertent whistle. They got another chance. and they hit a pass just to get them in the field goal range, and they tied us. That was before you had overtime. But that was a good team that tied us. And we went back and forth, up and down that year. We beat Navy, a real good Navy team that beat Washington in the bowl game. Or Washington went to the Rose Bowl, but Navy beat them. But we beat them at home, but then we stunk up the field at Army, so we didn't win the Commander-in-Chief trophy. But things were getting ready to go. And next year, things got – well, we came close to upsetting Notre Dame there. Next year, things got better and better, and then I was actually in Slippery Rock in '81, then went back to Air Force. But they beat San Diego State a tremendous second half in the Mirage Bowl in Tokyo. And so by 1982, it all fell into place. And we upset BYU, the only game they lost. Steve Young was the quarterback. We upset a very good Notre Dame team, beat them 30-something to 10. And first time Air Force had ever beaten Notre Dame. And, it was really rolling then. And we won, I think we were 8-5. But now Vanderbilt, we wound up playing them in the Hall of Fame Bowl. Now Vanderbilt was 10-1, and they had beaten Alabama. That was a good Vandy football team.
Who was the head coach of Vanderbilt then?
George McIntyre.
Okay.
And his son Mike was, people are forgetting, Mike was National Coach of the Year about 5 years ago at Colorado. So
yeah.
People can win at Colorado. Bill McCartney won a national championship, and Prime Sanders, he's going to win big out there. If he doesn't leave too quick to go to Florida State, but anyway, but they had a great team there at Vandy, and we beat them 36-28. They had a kid that caught 21 passes on us, but thank goodness most of them were short. But we held him right there at the end. He caught one right at the end on 4th down, and they had to measure, and we held him. We won. But it was rolling then, and we turned around the next year and won 10 ball games at Air Force and beat Notre Dame again. at Notre Dame, blocked a field goal last play of the game, won 22-21. And so we went on from there to Arkansas, and we had a great 5 years at Arkansas. And Coach Hatfield's he stayed 6 before he went to Clemson, but he has the winningest percentage of any coach in the history of Arkansas, better than Lou Holtz and Frank Wells.
Wow.
And he's back there retired and doing great. I'm going to see him this weekend. We've got a Bobby Dodd Foundation golf tournament in Atlanta from the people that run the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Award. And we've got people coming in. Steve Spurrier's coming. And, we always have a lot of good people. Ken's coming. And Ray Goff's going to be there and everything.
Yeah, Coach, I was going to ask you about the legends and, Bobby Dodd. I mean, did you get to meet him, Coach? And what was so great about Coach Dodd?
Great man, great coach. I think I met him one time, but I didn't have good enough grades in high school to go to Tech. And Bobby Dodd was the coach at Georgia Tech, Troy. Every kid in the South wanted to go play for him. That's when people were running tough programs. I mean, Shug Jordan was running a tough program at Auburn. Bear Bryant, I mean, those practices were tough, but the toughest of all were probably at Georgia, back when Coach Wally Butts was there. So everybody wanted to go to Georgia Tech because he would get a bunch of smart guys, and they never scrimmaged during the football season. That's when you scrimmaged every day.
Yeah.
It was brutal. And they didn't have the number limits like there are today, too. They'd bring in a whole bunch of guys, and the fittest survived. And they played volleyball on Monday during the season. And so, I mean, that was where you wanted to be. And Atlanta was a great place to be and everything. And, they won like 7 straight bowl games, a couple of national championships. And so you wanted to be there. And he made, I've read his books and everything. He told his players, he said, when I finished my eligibility at Tennessee, I was a sophomore in school. And so he made sure those guys went to school at Georgia Tech, and he really worked them academically too. Now, he might be, might never hit. He'd keep you healthy for the games, and he told them he was going, if you'll hang in there for 3 quarters, I'll outsmart them in the 4th quarter. And I love to hear Bill Curry tell those stories. See, Bill Curry played for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all get together, all the former Dodd Coach of the Year Award winners, we all get together at Christmas for the bowl game, the Peach Bowl. We go for 3 days. It's a great treat. And then this golf tournament. And so you hear all the legends of Dodd and all those guys that play for him. They're around and come and everything. One of the guys from we had a bunch of guys from my high school that started for Tech. And so I love listening to them talk. A great running back, Billy Williamson. He was unbelievable. But those were, those are great days. But he set that tone for integrity and, but Tech got tougher and tougher academically on who they would let in. So he retired to be an AD after about 20 years as head coach, and then pulled him out of the SEC to go to the ACC, independent for a while, and then went to the ACC.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Bear Bryant, Coach. Did you get to meet him? Can you talk a little bit about Coach Bryant? You said he ran such a tough program. Everybody knows about the Junction Boys, but I mean, I'm just asking about the GOATs from when you were a young coach. Did you ever get to meet him, Coach?
Yeah. Well, actually, one day I had this boy playing for me at Charlotte High School in Punta Gorda, Florida, and everybody in the country wanted him. I was in my office one morning so we're getting ready. We were in the playoffs, and so it's that time of year. I was in there real early looking at some film, and all of a sudden my phone rang. He said, Coach Goldsmith.
Man.
He said, this is Paul Bryant.
Wow.
And he said, tell me about Burton Lawless. Man, I didn't wash that ear. That phone was hanging on to for a week. Probably.
Wow.
But it was just, it was a legend call. And I mean, he had built that program. Well, he built a program in Kentucky, Maryland, Texas A&M. But when he went back to his old school there at Alabama, it'd been a long time since Alabama. They had been awfully good in the 30s, 40s. Wallace Wade, who actually left there to go to Duke, but they won a bunch of national championships, including when he was playing. And a guy named Frank Thomas was coach, but he brought them back for nothing, and they were hard nosed. But the thing that I loved about it, they were small. Now Danny Ford, who was later the great coach of Clemson, Danny Ford, he was playing tackle. He probably weighed 195, 200 pounds, maybe 210. And I remember them throwing tackle eligible passes to him, but they would get after you. Leroy Jordan probably is the best college linebacker I ever saw. And Leroy Jordan didn't weigh any more than about 190-something pounds, but he was fantastic. And later was a great Cowboy linebacker when they were in the Super Bowls winning them. But he had those kind of guys, and Kenny Stabler, and he had Joe Namath and Steve Sloan. People don't remember until Joe Namath hurt his knee. He ran pretty good, and Steve Sloan the same way came along after him, and then Stabler. But and then they had been throwing the ball and everything. And then everybody else started doing that, and so the next thing he knew, he surprised everybody in 1971 with the wishbone and destroyed everybody. But he was a legend. The last time I ever saw him, first time I was ever up close to him, I was walking out, I forget the hotel. We had the convention at Los Angeles, and he had just retired. He'd coached his last game. In fact, that game against Vanderbilt we played was in Birmingham when the Hall of Fame Bowl was there. And Alabama was playing in I think, the Liberty Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the convention was like, a week or so later. And I just was doing something at the desk at the hotel, and I was starting out the door, and he came walking in, and it just broke my heart because I saw a man that was obviously sick, that he wasn't doing well, but he was a heck of a person too. I mean, and none of us are saints, but he was just looked up to by everybody in the profession. He was the guy, him and Woody Hayes during that time, and he was just special. I know I signed a guy at Florida A&M one time, a strong safety that came along a little late named Spanky Ramsey, and Bear Bryant, one of his players, was the head coach at the school, Miami Killian.
Oh, I remember Miami Killian.
Yeah. And so the Bear was the speaker for the banquet. Well, he started looking. They were having highlight films, and
yeah.
But this guy was fantastic, and so he started asking.
I'm sorry, Coach. I thought I had my mic on mute. I was telling my dad I was on the phone with you, Coach. Yeah.
But anyway, he was asking him, so is this guy going? Is he being recruited? And they said, well, he signed with Florida.
I'm on the phone.
He signed the first week in December at that time for FAMU, and so. But Coach Bryant really liked him. And they said, well, the guy coach asked him, "So you want him?" And he said, no. And he said, I was good friends with Jake Gaither. And Jake was our athletic director emeritus at the time. And in his words, he said, I will never steal anybody from Coach Gaither's school. And we got Spanky, and man, he was a great player for those national championship teams. But I always respected Coach Bryant for doing that. And, but, and then Rudy Hubbard, who I was working for at the time, he played and coached for Woody. And boy, you talk about the same kind of coach, hard-nosed, but real fundamental, greatest fundamental coach probably ever. And that's where I learned it from Rudy Hubbard, where he got it from Rudy. I mean, you couldn't go out and coach his players. If you were a position coach, they had clinics where every single thing you were going to be working on that year, you presented to the coaching staff and, explain. And Woody would say, hey, unless you can get it across to the players, it's not going to get done. And he'd pick you apart, boy. And so Rudy did that when we came to FAMU. And, oh, man, you talk about assistant coaches sweating. But they did that. And then we flew into Baltimore one night, Baltimore-Washington Airport, for the convention there in January of 75. And Rudy had me working something with the special teams, the punt team. Well, Woody had invented that spread punt at the time. We got in there about midnight, and everybody's waiting for their baggage. And all these bags are sitting out there and everything. So Woody was sitting on a bench waiting for his. And we had come in there off this plane from Florida. And Rudy said, how about come show? He wanted to show me and a couple of those other coaches how to coach some of this stuff on the protection on the punt team. Shoot, Woody grabbed a few of those suitcases. I said, these guys here. And then he proceeded to be the rusher on me, and he's telling me what to do and all that, and the footwork and everything. There it is. And by that time, it's 12:30 in the morning. And I got Woody Hayes, 70-something years old, and a legend just like the Bear. Mm-hmm. And he's got his hands on me, making me work my feet, twisting my shoulders where they're supposed to be. That was a huge thrill and everything.
Man.
So that was it was a special time, in life for me.
Yeah, Coach. And when you say spread punt, is it like the pro style punt with like a split in on each side?
No, that's what. Back then it was entirely different. You'd probably call that a tight punt today, but it wasn't as tight. It was the splits were bigger and than what had been the conventional type thing. Mm-hmm. And the way you protected and covered, maybe at the time, people just called it that time.
Yes, sir. So, I mean, you talked about Bear, you talked about Woody. Like, what did you hang your hat on as a coach? Like, what did you make sure that your players knew when they got done with being in your program? It's not just about football, Coach.
Well, football was fundamentals. How wide your feet were, how wide, the first step, all those fundamentals of each position. Mm-hmm. And I worked with Al Grove for a while at Air Force for 1 year. And Al used to have a saying, and he said, missed assignments and missed alignments will get you beat worse than ability, Mm-hmm. And that was true. So, and I've seen some teams be pretty good that I didn't think were that fundamental with their steps and this and that, but they were great teams with great athletes across the board. But for most football teams, if you're going to be successful, that first step, everything about it, going to the right place, that's big. But now as far as life is concerned, you had to have good characters. Mm-hmm. You had to have good people. First of all, if you didn't, it wasn't any fun. And my philosophy was I wanted the people that our assistant coaches enjoyed coaching their kids and that other people enjoyed being teammates with. Mm. And if you don't have that, sometimes you have enough talent that you may win it all anyway, but you don't have any fun when you do that. Mm. And you wanted that good atmosphere. That's why I hate to see what's going on in college football now with this transfer portal. I just can't, I had a few kids that would come in, maybe say at Rice that had another year of eligibility, but they could graduate and they wanted to go on. That would break my heart. I was happy for them. They were graduating, et cetera. But, to lose kids that way that you thought just were an integral part of a family, and I can't see that, it's not there anymore. And it's a shame because my players are coming from coaching now. I just got off the phone with one of my players, called me from Florida A&M. I coached him in high school a couple of years and coached him there for 4 years. And he calls me, 65 years old, calls me all the time. And players from a lot of these schools, that means more than any of the wins and losses, plaques, whatever. You know, when you're an old coach and these guys are calling and checking up on you, it's wonderful.
Yeah, Coach. And I'm so glad that Coach Trot gave me your number so I could get you on and meet you, Coach. Who are some of the players? Like you mentioned your player at Florida A&M. Who are some of your players that went on and coached or either were successful, you know, maybe outside of football?
Well, we got some. I know one's on the board of trustees there at Rice.
Wow.
Oh, my son-in-law is working for one right now, a really neat Christian corporation.
Luke Roche.
Luke Roche.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he's gone on to, we've got guys from the Air Force Academy that were astronauts.
Wow.
One of my linebackers at Air Force, Dickie Clark, he's superintendent. He's a 3-star general. I think he's 3 stars. The superintendent of the Air Force Academy. So there's guys like that from there. There's guys from Florida A&M that we had a tremendous lady that ran the business school, Ms. Mobley, Dr. Mobley, back then. And we've got all sorts of guys from that team just tremendously successful in business. And that's been big. We got Duke guys. I think last time I counted, about 8 or 9 of the guys that I had at Duke are doctors. Most of them orthopedic surgeons.
Mm.
And so you look at those things. I read something the other day, said you measure your success as a coach, 20, 30 years down the line when you see what your players are doing.
No doubt, Coach.
Guys at Arkansas, some of them, Chuck Peterson played for us at Air Force. He's been a real good college coach. Tim Horton, who played for us at Arkansas, has done really well in coaching. I mentioned Shanahan before. There's a bunch of those guys out there that have, been real successful in whatever endeavors they want. Most of them have had very successful marriages, and children have done well. And that's a big thing to see them have those lives. And I know, gosh, when Ken Hatfield first went to Clemson, boy, he had a great. Trot was the defensive coordinator. I'm sure he told you about that. Bobby was the defensive coordinator then at Clemson. Just when I went to Rice, Bobby took over for me there last year at Arkansas as a coordinator. Then he went to Clemson, and there was guys they had what you would call some outlaws on that team, and they did not buy into a lot of things, but they were so good. I mean, they were just a great team, but they didn't buy into a lot of things that Coach Hatfield was trying to teach. Coach Hatfield's a real strong Christian, and some of them didn't buy into it at all, and they were rebellious. And you know what? There's about 3 of them that I know of from. I think they were all defensive guys at that time, but they're all preachers now.
Wow.
And in fact, one of them is a chaplain for one of the NFL teams. And
man,
and been leaders in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes throughout the country. So, and we've seen that. When I coached at Lenore-Ryan University, my last one, I had a guy that was the biggest pain in the neck to coach I ever coached. A safety that came in there from was a corner. First of all, he told me he didn't want to play safety, but gosh, he was the perfect safety. Told me that, had a horrible, horrible attitude. I mean, the worst I'd ever been around. The way he talked to coaches and things like that. So, and he was worked up where he was playing. And then finally, I had to sit him down. We played the biggest game of the year, our biggest rival, Carson Newman College. We hadn't beaten them in 30-something years, 32 years. And in fact, my AD told me, Neil McGahey, rest his soul, he told me, you're never going to be as good as Carson Newman. But she said, please, one Saturday for 3 hours, please try to beat him. And we were on the verge Oh, in fact, we had them beat, and I've got my best defensive back sitting down. I've got a 5'7" guy in his place, and they threw an alley oop in the end zone right at the end of the game, beat us 17-13, and all. But the kid came around the next year, and he was playing. Finally moved to safety. And, he became we had Dow Shealy, you remember him from the University of Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
Dow was later, when he quit coaching at Richmond, became the president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes for 2 years, national president. And anyhow, his son was over the FCA force in that part of North Carolina. And he worked closely with our kids, Lenore Ryan. And he told me how this kid, I'd retired, and Mike Houston, the coach of East Carolina. Now, Mike, I brought him there. He's from my hometown, Franklin, North Carolina. He's like a son to me. And anyway, so Lance tells me this kid, Michael, he's become this great leader. And Lance led him, the Lord said, he's become this great leader. And then one of the coach's wives told me, said he sat there and listened to him in a restaurant telling some recruits one time on a visit weekend. He said how horrible he was. He said, these people made a man out of me. And, so when you see kids turn around like that, and that's what happened with those at Clemson, and that's what happened with North Ryan. And, we turned that program around. Then Mike took him to great heights, took him to the national championship game. And this kid's coaching now somewhere, still plays in the Arena League, and he's a coach too.
Wow.
But so you see those guys that get straight, and we had some guys at Arkansas that could go either way, and they're all doing real well now, and everything. So, I mean, that is the relationships. You can't buy relationships with trophies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fortunate I have some of those awards and things, and part of some of that stuff, and everything, and I love it. I'm grateful for all of it, but it's nothing like the phone calls you get from the players.
Yes, sir. When you were at Duke, what was your relationship with Coach Krzyzewski, and what was so good about him, Coach?
He was intense fundamentalist, and between him and then he had one of his great players, Tommy Amaker. When we first got there, Tommy coached the Dickens out of their defense, but the fundamentals. And I'd have to go by Cameron Indoor Stadium on the way to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so some days, especially on a Thursday or something like that, when you'd have a lot of your preparation done while our assistant coaches were in their meetings with the players, I'd leave to go to practice early. And I'd stop off at Cameron and watch them practice, because just like you're asking me, I wanted to find out what was making this guy so special.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a stickler for fundamentals. He was a disciple of Bobby Knight's.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike, I guess, was just smarter than Bobby Knight. Mike was just like Bobby Knight. But most of the time, he could control himself. You know what I mean?
No choking anybody, for calling him Knight, and no throwing chairs.
And Mike would, when you represent a place like Duke University or Air Force, or when I was at Rice, you're representing institutions that are a little bit special now.
Oh yeah.
It's not just whether you win or not. You better conduct yourself right. You better bring in the kind of kids that conduct themselves, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you see guys that play for Duke like Shane Battier, and class guys across the board. And so, Mike did that, but now he was tough as nails. In fact, I can remember one day being in there, and a couple of my coaches, Heimendinger and one of their offensive coach, stopped to watch, and they were talking. And Lord of mercy, Mike blew that whistle and told him, be quiet, get out of there. But fundamental, he was rock solid, fundamental in every single thing they did. And I know I'm outside Atlanta now in Canton, Georgia, and we just got one of his disciples as the new head coach of the Hawks. And I guarantee you, and the Hawks didn't play defense worth anything, but I guarantee you with him coming in there, they'll be playing defense, they'll be gone.
Yeah, so if there's a young coach out there today that wants to be great, like you said, Woody Hayes is the best fundamental coach. Mike Krzyzewski is probably the best fundamental coach. I've never met Coach Belichick, but I would imagine he's probably pretty good in fundamentals too. What could a young coach do? Yeah, what could a young coach do to learn the fundamentals? And I mean, where do you start?
Well, you go look at people who are successful and find out why they're successful, and you spend time. You study their film. You go to clinics and you go visit them, see how they do things there. Barry Switzer was a tremendous college football coach, and he had the reputation on the outside of being kind of loose with his players and this and that. But I sure had my eyes open when Trot and I went to watch them practice one time. Trot and I and Roger Henshaw, another great coach we had with us, that stayed with Coach Hatfield for 20-something years. Well, we were going to study some stuff. And so we weren't Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Norman, Oklahoma, not that far apart. So we flew over there one day, and I guess we were on winter break or something. But they had just come back from spring break. It was going to be the first day of winter workouts. And, we'd heard about everything being kind of loosey-goosey, but it was, but not the things that counted. And so.
Ooh, I like that, Coach. I like that. It was loosey-goosey except for the things that counted. Like he wasn't worried about what color socks the guy might have on or earring. But so what do you mean by that?
Well, here's an example. We're in there watching film. Now we're studying their film. Bobby Proctor, their secondary coach, with some things we want to see and learn. So Trot and I and our outside linebacker coach went. Well, about 2:00 in the afternoon, and we were in this little room and said, well, y'all got to give up this room. And because we got these guys coming in to study some film. Well, actually, you weren't supposed to be meeting with them in a group like that if it wasn't spring practice. The rules, I don't know what the rules are today, but hey, they were there. They were on time.
Yeah.
They had them in there. So then they were going to take them out, and they were going to it was the first day back from spring break now, and the first day of classes. And so we go down there to the stadium or the practice field or wherever we were. I think it was in the stadium. And they're doing all these agility drills and things like that you do in the off season. But there was one group that they had that they kept afterwards, and it was pretty good, average size group, I guess. And they were killing those guys. And I said, what in the world did they do? And they said they missed class today. They missed a class. And I said, well, how'd you find out so quick? It's, middle of the afternoon. And they said, well, Coach sent a bunch of student teachers to those classes. And I mean, student coaches.
Yeah, GAs.
And GAs too. And in those classes. And then even had some of the full-time coaches in classes they were really suspect somebody would miss. And so there they were. They were back. And before the day was out, they knew every guy that missed a class. And all those meetings, all those drills, everything started on time. He was a stickler for people being on time. He was a stickler for them going to class. They had a great graduation rate, which nobody could have believed probably about Oklahoma in those days,
Yeah.
And, but he was a stickler for things like that. Great veteran coaches that taught fundamentals. Some of them came up under Frank Borosy from Arkansas. Barry did. And some of their other guys that came along, in that era. But again, it was fundamentals. That's why Woody was. That's why Bear Bryant was. The little things, all those little things. And, it makes a difference. You got to have good people to win, but good people who are sloppy with their fundamentals and coaches don't care about it will usually lose to other people that have good people that stress the fundamentals really good.
Yes, sir. Coach, we've been on here for almost an hour now. I mean, time flies when you're having fun.
I'm long-winded. I'm sorry.
Oh no, Coach. That's why I have you on here, Coach. Because I used to do a clinic, and I'd have 500 coaches there, and I'd have probably about 30 speakers, and I wouldn't even be able to listen to one guy, maybe one. Coach Bill Mountjoy. I don't know if you remember Coach Mountjoy. He was from Virginia. He's a high school coach. Yeah, but I'd listen to him because he's 80, but I wouldn't be able to hear anybody. But I've started this podcast. I've been able to do 150, Coach, since January. So, like, I get to pick people's brains. I get to listen. I get to learn. It's been a great opportunity.
That's the way to do it. Now, I haven't mentioned Joe Paterno but once today.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about Coach Paterno?
Oh, he's so good. And when you said Virginia, I was thinking about George Welsh, who was a great fundamental coach. But I had the good fortune when I was a young coach. I knew some people on the Orange Bowl committee, and they used to have these plush jobs to sign people as chauffeurs. Then back in those days, they would come for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, to the bowl game.
Yeah.
And so I knew somebody, and I said, can you give me one of those jobs and assign me to Joe Paterno?
Wow.
And they did. Now, this was his about third year as head coach. And he was on the ropes going into that year. Because he took over for a legend, Rip Engel, who was his college coach. Rip Engel's niece is Jerry Spurrier. Her name was Jerry Starr when we were in school, but Jerry Spurrier. But Rick Engel was a legend in his own right at Penn State. So he retires. Joe takes over. Joe was young. And they did pretty good the first couple of years, but not where they needed to be going. And all summer, he worked on this defense, and he made these assistant coaches, some veteran guys. He was younger than all the other assistant coaches. And he put in this defense, which was an 8-man front, had real good players. Mike Reed, Steve Smear, All-American defensive tackles. Dennis Onkotz was an All-American linebacker. Jack Ham was that year was a backup outside linebacker. He was a sophomore. Sophomores could know. And Franco Harris was the second team fullback. Lydell Mitchell was the second team tailback that year. So I'm there as Joe's chauffeur. But when he found out I was a high school coach, and I was a high school coach at the time, he wanted me. They couldn't take all their freshmen. They weren't allowed to bring freshmen to bowl games. So scout team was kind of strange. And anyway, he had me hold the cards. I even would hand the ball off playing quarterback and do, help with some drills.
Wow.
And things like that. So I got to see firsthand. You talk about a guy that was a dominant guy now for fundamentals. Lord mercy, he could see he might be on one field of the offense and he'd notice a bad step by a defensive player on the other field. Man, he'd be screaming at him. They had a great All-American punter, was All-Pro named Bob Parsons. I can remember the next year. See, they went to the Orange Bowl twice in a row. They beat Kansas the first year when they were number 3. Kansas was number 2, and Kansas had 12 men on the field when they scored what looked like the winning thing, and then Penn State beat them. And anyway, they held Penn State, but they had 12 guys on the field, and Penn State ran another play and won the game. But fundamentally, then the next year, I can remember him screaming at Parsons from across the field, "You're going to kick your coverage." You know how Joe talked. And so, anyway, sure enough, they get in the game, and a guy named Johnny Rowland from Missouri returned a punt on him or got close to it or something. But I remember him screaming that, and he was, oh, man, those guys now, they taught fundamentals, same way I talked about Woody's group. But, he was a great coach, great person. What they did to him in Penn State was horrible, the way they did him at the end.
Yes, sir.
Horrible. We had his wife, Sue and Miss Dooley, Barbara Dooley. We had them for the thing with the Bobby Dodd coaches, winners and their wives for 3 days at the bowl game this year, the Georgia-Ohio State game. And she's wonderful. She was like Carol Burnett, funny. You had a great time with her back then. And but then they'd have me babysit their kids at night. But that was a great experience. 2 seasons in a row. And he was always really wonderful with me. I had an opportunity to go to GA, and I had chance to become head coach at this high school. It was a great job, so I took that the next year. But he recommended me for the job at Florida A&M. And then when I went to Rice for the interview, there was a guy that was the managing partner of the largest law firm in Texas. But anyway, he was on the board of trustees, and he was in the interview committee. And he just asked me, "What do you think of Joe Paterno?" And I said, "Man, he is great." I told him like I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just so happened that this guy was a big fan of Paterno's. And so I called Joe. Joe called him that night.
Wow.
So that was 2 jobs, he helped me get. Next thing I knew, I was coach at Rice. But he was very, very, very special. And to be his chauffeur and whatever else I did. I took him and suit a mass every single morning.
Mm.
But that was a great time in my life. And he treated Pam so well. And they had a party after they won the bowl game. I Mike Reed playing the piano. Of course, he wound up all pro, quit after 3 or 4 years, and it was great, in the entertainment business and everything. But we were at the convention in Dallas. He hadn't seen Pam in 20 years. And I'm walking up to him in this auditorium, and she was with me. And he turned right around and called her by her name.
Wow.
But he was a great man.
Yeah, no doubt. I got to meet him one time, and I was blown away too, with how good he was.
Did you ever meet George Welsh?
Coach, when I started coaching, it was in 2000, and Coach Grove just got in the job. But I mean, I was at the game. I mean, I was a high school kid in 1995, and I was there when they beat Florida State. But I never got to meet him. But I mean, I used to watch all their games because I've been a Virginia fan my whole life.
He was a good football coach. He was the backfield coach or quarterback coach, and I guess coordinator. They didn't even call people coordinators back in the 60s like that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he was an excellent coach there at Penn State, and then of course took over Virginia, and he did a super job.
Yeah, and I know he had some great coordinators like Rick Lance, who.
Rick. Oh yeah. I got to know Rick when he was at Miami, and so first, we beat Notre Dame at Air Force, beat them pretty bad. First time played them the next year, and Rick Lance was the defensive coordinator, and that's why we won 21-20. But we also blocked 3 kicks on them.
Man,
and but they were a big difference with Rick Lance there.
Yeah, Coach. So last thing I want to ask you, Coach, before we get off here is, like, if there's a high school coach that's watching this, what can you tell them? What advice would you give them, Coach?
Well, first thing, make sure they do right by their wives.
Mm.
That's the number one thing. Because the wife's got, it's a hard ordeal for a coach's wife. So you got to balance things. Don't get with people unless there's a balance in the life of that staff, or you'll learn things the wrong way that will affect your family, and you'll never have the family life that we've been married 57 years as of 2 days ago. And those things need to outlast coaching. And so you got to get working for somebody that's a family type person, whether you become a head coach in high school where you can control that, or going into college and working it that way. Now, there's a few people you don't want to work for. I'm not going to mention any names.
They only take off 2 weeks out of 52. Yeah, 7. They work 7 weekdays a week.
Yeah, today with the recruiting the way it is today, unfortunately, that's affecting everybody. But still, some. And if they got the players, they'll win. If they don't, they won't, But some are ridiculous. I told one guy that he had a chance to go to work for somebody who's a GA. I said, well, you'll hate every minute of it, but you can't turn it down. And he left with a national championship ring, and he's been a real successful SEC assistant coach the last 3 years. So sometimes you just got to do it if you know it's going to be temporary, like a GA. But I'd say that's a big important thing for your family. You know, and to be able to work for somebody to where you can have some kind of family life. But then the football part of it, like I said before, go to clinics, go visit people's campuses when you got a chance to, where you can sit on their practice and see, them actually doing it and everything. An old coach for the Dolphins, line coach, came to watch film on some prospects at FAMU, and I was there. Mo Scary was his name. He said, "Let me see your film." And I said, I want to see about this and that. And he said, "Just remember this. If it's not on the film, no matter what you say, you're not doing it." So it's important to go study where those guys are and where you have a chance to ask their coaches questions. And, you're not just sitting out in the audience for an hour. And just to, study it, learn your trade. That's, and don't be one of these guys that's always on the phone looking for the next job. Those guys usually don't get it because they're too busy pushing themselves and not learning. And the guys that are winning and being positive about the program they're in, they're the ones that always get ahead. The guy that's always pushing to get ahead in the wrong way doesn't ever seem to do that.
Yes, sir. And great advice. Thank you, Coach, for coming on. I'm going to press end here, and I'm going to press end on the podcast, but I'm going to stay on the phone and just ask you a few more questions, Coach.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Coach.
Very welcome.
All right. So